In 1903, workers exploring a cave in the English village of Cheddar found a nearly complete human skeleton, roughly 10,000 years old, the oldest of its kind ever discovered in Britain. For most of the 20th century, museums displayed reconstructions of this man, nicknamed Cheddar Man, the same way they displayed every other ancient Briton. Pale skin, a face that looked more or less like a modern Englishman in a slightly rougher coat. Nobody had any real reason to question that image because nobody had the technology to check it. Scientists could measure his skull, study his teeth, estimate his height and his age at death down to a fairly narrow range. But his actual coloring, the thing every visitor to that museum exhibit would look at first, was always a guess dressed up as a reconstruction. Then in 2018, scientists at London's Natural History Museum and University College London finally extracted and sequenced his actual DNA, drilling a tiny hole through one of the densest bones in his skull to recover genetic material that had survived for 10,000 years. What they found did not just update a museum display, it quietly broke one of the most deeply held assumptions people have about ancestry, appearance, and what it even means to look like you belong somewhere. Cheddar Man, this foundational ancient Briton, had skin described by the research team as dark to black, and he had strikingly blue eyes. The combination floored even the scientists working on the project. One of the museum's own researchers admitted it was a genuine surprise to find that exact pairing in someone living in Britain that long ago. If you've ever wondered what your own eye color actually says about where you and your ancestors came from, the honest answer turns out to be far stranger and far more interesting than anything you were taught in school. Cheddar Man wasn't a fluke. Genetic analysis placed him among a group scientists called the Western hunter-gatherers, a population that had migrated into Europe at the end of the last ice age, and that shows up again and again in ancient skeletons recovered from Spain, Hungary, and Luxembourg, all carrying that same unexpected combination: dark skin, light-colored eyes. One particularly striking example, a roughly 7,000-year-old hunter-gatherer recovered from a cave in northwestern Spain, nicknamed La Braña, showed the identical pattern when his DNA was studied: dark skin, dark hair, and blue eyes. A profile researchers found genuinely difficult to reconcile with older assumptions. Around 10% of present-day indigenous British ancestry traces directly back to the population Cheddar Man belonged to, according to the researchers who worked on his genome, meaning that pattern of dark skin paired with light eyes isn't some isolated curiosity sitting in one cave. It's a genuine, recurring snapshot of what a large portion of early Europe actually looked like, thousands of years before anyone living there resembled the pale, fair-eyed image so often used to represent the region today. For decades, the working theory had been simple and tidy. Light skin, light hair, and light eyes all evolved together in Europe as one. Connected adaptation to weaker, more northern sunlight, since paler skin helps the body produce vitamin D in regions that get less direct sun. Cheddar Man and his Mesolithic relatives broke that theory apart. Light eyes, it turns out, didn't co-evolve with light skin at all. The genetic mutation behind blue eyes appears to have already existed in European hunter-gatherer populations, thousands of years before genes for pale skin became common. These were two completely separate evolutionary stories that simply happened to land in the same general region of the world, not one single package deal that arrived together. So if light skin and light eyes evolved on totally different timelines, where did blue eyes actually come from, and why? The method scientists used to figure out Cheddar Man's coloring in the first place is worth pausing on, because it's the same basic principle behind everything else in this story. Researchers cannot directly see the color of a 10,000-year-old eye. The soft tissue is long gone. What they can do is read the specific genetic variants known to control pigmentation, the same OCA2, HER2, and related markers used in forensic prediction tools today, and run them through statistical models built from studying thousands of living people whose actual eye and skin color is already known. If a given combination of variants reliably predicts blue eyes in 90% of living people who carry it, finding that same combination in an ancient skeleton gives researchers a scientifically grounded basis for saying, with real statistical confidence, what color that person's eyes most likely were, even 10,000 years after the fact. It's the exact same logic, just pointed backward in time instead of forward into an unsolved case. This single mutation wasn't the end of the story for European ancestry either. A landmark 2014 genetic study analyzing ancient genomes from across the continent found that present-day Europeans don't descend from one single ancestral population at all, but from at least 3 distinct ancestral groups that mixed together over thousands of years. Those original Western hunter-gatherers like Cheddar Man and his relatives, early farmers who migrated in from the Near East bringing agriculture with them, and a later wave of pastoralist populations from the Eurasian steppe. Each of these groups carried its own mix of pigmentation genes, layering blue eyes from one population, paler skin from another, and various combinations of hair color genetics from a third, blending unevenly across the continent over thousands of years, rather than arriving as one tidy package. That's part of why eye color today looks so different depending on which exact region of Europe you're looking at. You're not looking at one trait spreading uniformly outward from a single point. You're looking at the overlapping leftovers of at least 3 separate ancient migrations, each one carrying its own particular slice of the pigmentation gene pool, settling unevenly across the map depending on exactly where each group ended up. As for the blue eye mutation itself, in 2008, a research team at the University of Copenhagen, led by geneticist Hans Eyberg, traced its origin down to a single specific genetic switch, a tiny change in a gene called HERC2 that controls the activity of a neighboring gene called OCA2, the gene primarily responsible for producing melanin, the pigment behind eye, skin, and hair color. This particular switch doesn't destroy the gene. It just quietly dials its activity down inside the iris specifically, reducing how much brown pigment gets produced there and allowing light to scatter instead. The exact same physical effect that makes a cloudless sky look blue with no blue pigment actually present anywhere in it. When Eyberg's team examined blue-eyed people from genetically distant populations, including Denmark, Turkey, and Jordan, they found something remarkable. Every one of them carried the identical version of that switch, suggesting the mutation arose exactly once in a single ancestor, somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000 years ago, most likely near the Black Sea. Every person alive today with naturally inherited blue eyes can trace that trait back to that one shared point of origin. What scientists still genuinely argue about is why that single mutation spread so widely instead of quietly disappearing, which is the far more likely fate for most random genetic changes. A neutral mutation, one offering no survival benefit, can occasionally spread through a small founding population purely by chance, a process called genetic drift. In the same way, a particular surname can become unusually common in one isolated village for no deeper reason than ordinary family luck. Other researchers have proposed an environmental advantage, suggesting lighter eyes may have offered some small benefit in far northern regions with weaker, more seasonal sunlight, though this idea sits awkwardly next to the fact that ancient blue-eyed populations like Cheddarmans existed well before and well outside the deep northern range that theory would predict. A third hypothesis, argued by some researchers as recently as the past couple of years, suggests something more provocative: sexual selection. In a world where every single human being on Earth had brown eyes, a sudden, rare, novel eye color might genuinely have made its carriers stand out as more memorable or more desirable mates, giving them a real, measurable reproductive edge purely through being different, similar to the evolutionary logic behind a peacock's tail or a bright tropical bird's plumage. Some researchers, pushing this idea, further suggests the effect could have compounded across generations in an almost self-reinforcing loop, where people already carrying the trait showed a preference for partners who also carried it, accelerating its spread far faster than pure chance alone could explain. None of these theories has been definitively proven over the others, and serious researchers actively disagree about which one, or which combination, best explains how a single neutral mutation in one ancient person eventually became the dominant eye color across entire modern nations. And concentrated is exactly the right word. Globally, brown remains by far the most common eye color on the planet, found in the overwhelming majority of people across Africa, Asia, the Americas, and the Pacific. Blue, green, and gray eyes, by contrast, are overwhelmingly concentrated in populations with European ancestry. And even within Europe, the distribution is wildly uneven. Northern and Eastern European countries, particularly around the Baltic Sea, show some of the highest concentrations of blue eyes recorded anywhere, with Estonia and Finland frequently cited in population surveys as sitting at the very top of that list, commonly estimated at somewhere in the range of 80 to 90% of their populations. Move further south and west, and the numbers shift noticeably. Surveys commonly place the Netherlands and Denmark somewhere around 60%, Germany closer to 40%, and the figure keeps dropping the further you travel from that original Baltic concentration, against a global average for blue eyes generally placed at somewhere around 8 to 10%. This is also exactly the kind of regional genetic signature that consumer ancestry DNA companies rely on when they generate a predicted trait report, alongside your ethnicity breakdown, reading the same handful of pigmentation genes that trace straight back to that single ancient mutation, then comparing your specific version of those genes against the populations where they're most heavily concentrated today. Green eyes are rarer still almost everywhere they're measured, and gray eyes rarer again, partly because gray and blue are so visually close that many surveys simply lump them into one category, which says less about biology and more about how blurry the lines really are once you actually try to draw them. None of this distribution happened because any particular population was somehow more or less evolved than another. It happened because a single mutation occurred in one place, spread through one regional population over thousands of years of migration and intermarriage, and simply never reached most of the rest of the world in any meaningful concentration. The same way certain surnames, certain folk songs, or certain crop varieties stayed geographically clustered around wherever they first took hold. There's another myth worth retiring here. When most people were taught with complete confidence in a basic biology class that brown eyes are simply dominant, blue eyes are simply recessive, and two blue-eyed parents can never, under any circumstance, have a brown-eyed child. It sounds airtight. It is not actually true, and researchers have known it wasn't true for well over a century, even while the textbook version kept getting repeated anyway. As early as 1909, scientists studying real family records found documented cases of blue-eyed parents. Producing children with brown and gray eyes, results the simple single gene model said should have been flatly impossible. A separate, larger study published in 1918 found dozens more cases following the exact same unexpected pattern, out of several hundred children born to blue-eyed couples. We now understand why. Eye color isn't governed by one gene with one dominant and one recessive version. At least 8, and by some estimates well over a dozen, different genes interact to determine exactly how much melanin ends up in your iris and how it's distributed there. And those genes can occasionally combine in ways that produce a result neither parent's own eye color would predict. It's rare. It is also completely real, and it has been quietly documented in the scientific literature since long before either of your own grandparents were born, which makes it one of the longest-running gaps between what scientists actually knew and what got taught in classrooms anyway. There's one more layer of mystery worth knowing about, a rare condition called heterochromia, where a single person has two differently colored eyes or sometimes different colored patches within the same iris. In most cases, this isn't dangerous or even medically significant. It generally comes from a small, harmless variation in how melanin gets distributed during early development, sometimes present from birth and sometimes appearing later in life, occasionally following a minor injury or a specific medical condition affecting just one eye. It's a genuine, if uncommon, demonstration of just how locally and unevenly that single pigment, melanin, can end up distributed, even within one individual person's own body, let alone across an entire species spread over every continent on Earth. If a single mutation thousands of years ago could change an entire species' eye color permanently, it should come as no surprise that the same underlying pigment system can occasionally produce two different results within one single person, sitting on either side of the very same face. So here is what your eye color actually represents once you strip away the textbook oversimplifications. It is not a clean, predictable inheritance passed down like a coin flip between two possible outcomes. It is the layered, still partially mysterious outcome of a single ancient mutation that occurred in one specific human being somewhere near the Black Sea, 6,000 to 10,000 years ago. A mutation whose ultimate evolutionary success scientists still cannot fully agree on, riding alongside an entirely separate evolutionary story about skin color that, as Cheddar Man proved beyond any doubt, did not arrive on the same timeline at all. Two unrelated genetic stories, evolving on two unrelated schedules, just happened to converge in the same region of the world, and we spent most of the last century assuming they were one single story, simply because that's how they happened to look by the time anyone started writing it down. Whatever color is looking back at you from the mirror tonight, brown, green, hazel, gray, or blue, you're looking at a fragment of a journey that started thousands of years before recorded history, carried forward through countless generations of people who never once knew where that particular trait actually came from and who never could have imagined that, one day, complete strangers across an entire planet would be able to trace it back to a single person, in a single place, at the very beginning of the story. The next time someone tells you eye color is just a simple coin flip between two parents, you'll know the real answer is far older, far stranger, and still, even now, not fully solved.